Welcome, my friends. Douglas V. Gibbs, Mr. Constitution Hour. This is the show that used to be on Salem Media, KCBQ, The Answer San Diego, and K-Praise, KPRZ, and we are no longer there. It's now been, a month or two, and we migrated over to this spot, Rumble and YouTube, both with the keyword Douglas V. Gibbs, and I appreciate the fact that any of you who are watching live or later are here. We've gone from a huge audience on the radio station to now building from scratch again here online. And so I need you to hit the subscribe button or the follow button, whatever buttons there are, to make sure that you get these programs and that you help our numbers and spread the word. If you enjoy my shows, these hour-long shows a couple times a week, or my other shorter videos, or my 2-hour-long shows when it comes to For the Republic or Constitution Radio, be sure to share the links. Be sure to let folks know. All right, that all said, as always, a lot to say, not enough time to say it, kind of thing, and appreciate all that you guys are about. By the way, it's an appreciation of you being a part of, I guess, this journey. My intent is to inform. I do talk politics. I do talk Constitution. I've got a couple of people who are like, hey, man, I don't want to hear all that. I just want Constitution. Well, they go hand in hand. So we're going to talk a little bit about both. But today I wanted to begin the program with a little history lesson to help understand why we're at where we are now. 1819. This is going back to John Marshall as Chief Justice of the United States. And, this case, McCulloch versus Maryland, 1819, came up in a conversation with my good friend Brady the War Hamster. And if you want to find him, rumble.com/War Hamster, make sure to capitalize the W and the H in War Hamster. No spaces there, no hyphens, no anything else. And the ruling represents one of the most significant constitutional betrayals in American history. A fact that is no surprise, considering that Chief Justice John Marshall, who, and I have a whole chapter about him in my book, The 7 Worst Constitutional Liars. And the more you get to know Marshall, in the legal community, he's the guy who established our system. Now, what he did is he moved it away from the Constitution. And one of his most significant constitutional betrayals in American history, no surprising, once again, coming from John Marshall, was the force behind it. From an originalist perspective, this case, McCulloch versus Maryland, fundamentally violated the Constitution's enumeration doctrine and transformed our federal system into something the founding fathers never intended: centralized national government ruling over states as if they were mere provinces. Understand, a lot of these things were discussed during the Constitutional Convention in 1787 and were shot down. They were denied a chance to come into being, specifically because they did not fit our system the way the proponents claimed. The 10th Amendment to the Constitution unambiguously states that power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, or reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. This establishes what originalists would call the enumeration doctrine. And basically, the enumeration doctrine is a constitutional concept that establishes the federal government possesses only those powers expressly enumerated in the Constitution. If it's not there, they don't have the authority. We have this idea that's out there, this living, breathing Constitution idea, that it changes with time, which is not true. And this idea that if the Constitution doesn't prohibit it, they can do it. And that's not true either. That's not the way it's designed. It's designed to give authority. So if it's not given, you don't have it at the federal level. States are the opposite. States, if it's not listed in the Constitution, in other words, it's not given to the federal government, and it's not prohibited in the states, then it's a state issue. But with the federal government, it has to be expressly enumerated in order for the federal government to have the authority. Furthermore, Article 6 establishes federal supremacy. But federal supremacy, once again, is not what we have adopted to this day, where it's just the federal government supreme over state laws, period. What's supreme is only laws made in pursuance of the Constitution. This critical limitation means that supremacy applies to constitutional laws, not to those merely interpreted to be constitutional by judges or legislators. If it's not expressly enumerated in the Constitution, the federal law is not supreme. The concept of implied powers is something else came up with McCullough versus Maryland. And that emerged from Alexander Hamilton's arguments for a national bank. Hamilton knew the Constitution contained no express authorization for such an institution. So he devised a theory, and the theory is implied powers based on the necessary and proper clause. And his reasoning was essentially circular. To make something constitutional, one must simply read between the lines. If you think it's constitutional, if you think it's for the general welfare, if you think that it should be, then it is. Now, Thomas Jefferson vehemently opposed this approach. For Jefferson, the Constitution's meaning was clear on its face. Nothing in the Constitution resides between the lines of print. Jefferson argued that if the Constitution didn't expressly grant a power, that power didn't exist for the federal government. Enumeration doctrine. Chief Justice John Marshall exercising the unconstitutional power of judicial review, and judicial review itself is not enumerated in the Constitution. It was shot down during the Constitutional Convention in 1787. This idea that the courts have the authority to basically legislate, because think about what judicial review is. Judicial review is the courts deciding if a federal law is constitutional. And we have two problems there. If it's not constitutional, they strike it down, but all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress, Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution. Striking down a law is a legislative power. Therefore, it violates Article 1, Section 1, which says all legislative powers belong to Congress. Secondly, they say, well, someone's got to be able to check these things. So a part of the federal government should do it. I mean, think about it. We have a limited government, but the federal government, through its courts, have established a system where they are the final arbiters of what is constitutional. In other words, through the federal courts, the federal government decides for itself if its laws are constitutional. How is that limited government? I mean, if you've got a corporation out there, and there's belief that they might be operating in a manner that's outside the law, how are we going to feel if they say, no, we had our own investigators look into it, we're good? You're not going to decide for yourself whether or not you're following the law. There's going to be outside auditors, outside investigators, arbiters that are beyond your control. But we have the government sitting here saying, oh, yeah, no, we know we're constitutional because our arbiters, our guys, the federal courts say it's okay. So because we say our laws are okay, they're fine. That's one of the stupidest things I've ever come across. It is absolutely unconstitutional, absolutely violates separation of powers, limited government, and a whole list of other things. If the Constitution doesn't expressly grant the power doesn't exist for the federal government, and there is no power in the Constitution giving the courts that authority. Now, what they did with McCullough versus Maryland is through judicial review, the courts codified Hamilton's arguments back during the case of the United States Bank of the United States. And in this case, McCullough versus Maryland, the case centered on Maryland's attempt to tax the second Bank of the United States. So now you've got this idea of implied powers, this idea that, the federal supremacy. If you don't like it, states tough. The federal government said so. Federal supremacy. That's not how it works. If the federal government doesn't have the authority over the issue, but yet they're going to dictate to a state what they can or can't do on that issue. Marshall's opinion established both of these destructive doctrines, that the federal government has implied powers not expressly listed in the Constitution, and that states cannot interfere with these supposed federal powers. His famous statement that power to tax involves the power to destroy, created a framework for federal immunity from state regulation. And understand, here's the reason, and they say, well, we got to protect the federal government from the states. No, the whole point of the Constitution was to make sure that the states were controlling the federal government. This is the reason why the U.S. senators before the 17th Amendment were appointed by the state legislatures. This is why, in order for an amendment to become a part of the Constitution, it must be ratified by the states. This is why, before income tax, the states each paid into the budget, and they would look over the budget before deciding whether or not to give their money. That's what the based on population thing is. And so because the states paid based on their population, but they reviewed the budget, and then there were quite a few times the states said, "I'm not giving you money for that garbage. Fix it, and then we'll give you your money." The states are the parents. They're the ones who created the federal government in the first place during the Constitutional Convention through their delegates. So to sit here and say, well, we got to, like McCullough, did, and Marshall's attitude and today's leftist progressive ideology says, we got to protect the federal government from the states. The point was that the federal government operates at the pleasure of the states. The states had their voice in everything. The federal government early on couldn't do anything without approval from the states, either through their senators that were in the U.S. Senate, or through ratification, or through funding. But we have this attitude, this idea that the federal government should be a national government. And so the consequences of the McCullough case have been catastrophic for constitutional governance. It was one of the early attempts to push the states out of the process, to let the federal government be supreme and treat the states like they're a bunch of provinces. By endorsing implied powers, Marshall opened the door for virtually unlimited federal expansion. The federal government could now interpret its way into any arena of governance, regardless of constitutional enumeration. Well, we interpret to be for the general good. Oh, well, in that case, it's okay. No. And this McCullough decision laid the groundwork for transforming America into the country Hamilton dreamed of, one with an elite leadership, states reduced to mere corporations, as corporations meaning like provinces, as Hamilton argued at the Constitutional Convention, and federal supremacy over every issue. The constitutional republic of limited enumerated powers became a centralized national government, and McCullough versus Maryland were one of the early steps in that direction. Now, from an originalist perspective, McCullough versus Maryland should be recognized as an unconstitutional usurpation of power. The proper interpretation of the Constitution requires a strict adherence to the enumeration doctrine, which is given to us by the 10th Amendment. It was already given to us. The 10th Amendment put it in words. Recognition that federal supremacy applies only to laws made in pursuance of the Constitution, Article 6. Rejection of implied powers as unconstitutional innovations, a game of interpretation that's played to usurp the Constitution, and restoration of state sovereignty in areas not expressly delegated to the federal government. Let's bring the state sovereignty and state authority back. Let's put it back into the Senate by getting rid of the 17th Amendment. Let's get back to a Republican form of government by getting rid of 1964's Reynolds v. Sims. Let's get back to not allowing the federal government to decide for itself if it's constitutional by getting rid of judicial review. Get rid of implied powers and federal supremacy regardless of enumeration as provided by McCullough versus Maryland. The originalist position is clear. The Constitution created a federal government of limited, enumerated powers, not a national government of unlimited implied powers. McCullough versus Maryland represented a betrayal of this fundamental principle, and correcting this constitutional error is essential to restoring our republic. If we don't get back the voice of the states, if we don't return to the states having the say they should have, and see, this is all a part of the game. This is a part of the incremental takeover, so to speak. And by the way, for those of you just joining, welcome, Mr. Constitution Hour by Douglas V. Gibbs. You know what? I got my little screen small here. Let's make it bigger. There we go. I went through that entire thing with me in the little corner there, but that's okay. But anyway, get back to the point here. Welcome to the program, by the way, for those of you who are listening live or visiting. Understand that McCulloch versus Maryland, 1819, that was just a step along the way that began. And people say, well, Doug, when did the socialist attack on our Constitution begin? And my response always, before the ink was dry. So, well, wait a second, Doug. Socialism, communism didn't exist until Marx. Not true. It may not have been called by those names, but it existed. These communitarian, collectivistic, utopian schemes existed. The founding fathers were well aware of them. The Constitution was written in the manner it was to protect against those schemes, against the schemes of an overpowering government, authoritarian system. Good to see you, Mel, in the chat room. I do pay attention to the chat the best I can. But, so this revolution against our Constitution began very early. And it's been happening. It's happening now. But see, early on, it was a little here, a little there. Let's take away the state's voice here. Let's take away the state's voice there. Let's put implied powers in. Let's put federal supremacy in. But now, the communist revolution, as because us now, those of us around today, especially those of us that are Gen X or boomers, and I missed being a boomer by like 4 months, so I'm so close to being a boomer. I was born in April of '66, and the last boomer year is like 65, so I'm practically a boomer. But my generation, a generation slightly older than me, the Gen X generation that's kind of around me, we saw that communism was infiltrating our country. We saw it back in the 30s and the 20s. My good friend Warhamster, Brady Warhamster, he's doing a show where he's exploring the Fabian influence back in the 1890s and early 1900s. And so this communist, Marxist, socialist revolution has always been there. And like I said, you can go all the way back to the utopian threat back during the founding fathers. It's always been there. But the communists, utopianists, whatever you want to call them, had enough sense to only insert a little here, a little there to make sure that nobody really was alarmed or really noticed. It's the boiling frog thing, right? If you turn up the heat incrementally, very slowly, very carefully, the frog never realizes that the temperature is necessarily going up until it's too late and it's been cooked. And so because of that, we always saw a communist revolution taking place in America as a distant threat. My friends, it's happening now, right now. And they are not making any bones about it anymore. They're not being careful. Unlike the violent revolutions of history, this insidious transformation is occurring through cultural infiltration, institutional and ideological capture, the systematic erosion of constitutional principles. I mean, the far left has abandoned incrementalism for an open assault on America's founding values, believing they are close enough to victory. They see the light at the end of the tunnel. They thought they were close to history or to victory with Hillary. Hillary was the final nail in the coffin back in 2016. And then they figured they could operate without pretense by then. And then Trump stuck a stick in their spokes. And I don't care if you love Trump, hate Trump, kind of like him, kind of don't like him. I really don't care. The reality is he stuck a stick in their spokes that they can't stand, and they're freaking out. But understand, their incremental assault on American liberty and the fact they've gotten to the point where they feel like they can see the light at the end of the tunnel. This is not an accident. This has been a carefully orchestrated strategy decades in the making. In the battleship of ideas, you have to understand that while they can't win in the arena of ideas, the battlefield of ideas deep down inside the institutions and institutional control, the collectivists have been winning that. America's education system has become a pipeline for socialist agitation, producing generations who view property rights as evil and government control as virtuous. The statistics are alarming. According to a Heartland Institute Rasmussen Reports poll from late 2025, nearly 60% of likely voters aged 18 to 24 want a Democratic socialist in the White House in 2028. An ABC poll, exit poll, showed New York City Mayor Mamdani's, he captured 78% of under 30 voters, demonstrating the effectiveness of their indoctrination. The Democratic Socialists of America has seen its average membership age plummet from 68 to 33 in just over a decade, reflecting how successful they've captured young minds. This demographic shift represents the culmination of a long-term strategy to reshape educational curricula at all levels. I mean, I remember when I took a social studies class back in the 1990s, and I spent most of this semester debating a professor who insisted that socialism creates fairness and equality and equity, despite presenting historical evidence of socialist atrocities, Lenin, Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot, Castro, and Guevara's brutal regimes. I was alone in challenging this narrative at first. Now, by the end of the class, I had about half the class on my side. I had changed some minds. And surprisingly, this commie teacher gave me an A in the class. So I did all the work. I, did well on the test, did all the homework, but had an opinion that was vastly different from her. The white feminist commie female, even back then. Today, defenders of liberty, free markets, constitutional principles have dwindled to such an extent that such opposition in classrooms are likely non-existent. The indoctrination has become so complete that 62% of voters ages 18 to 29 now hold favorable views of socialism, 34% favoring communism outright. They've been taught that government should provide all basic needs and that success must be punished to achieve absolute equality. This mirrors the same utopian promises the founding fathers rejected. But now see, it comes with the added burden of historical ignorance about communism's century of atrocities that resulted in over 100 million deaths. The economic front of this revolution manifests through direct attacks on property rights, the cornerstone of American prosperity. Senator Bernie Sanders' recent proposal to confiscate 50% of the nation's largest artificial intelligence companies' wealth through an ownership tax represents a shocking departure from constitutional norms. This isn't taxation. It's an expropriation, literally seizing private property without compensation, a tactic straight from the communist playbook and in direct defiance, violation of the Constitution's Fifth Amendment, which explicitly prohibits government takings without just compensation. And if you get back to what the founders understood about that, just compensation wasn't fair market value as you hear today. It was understood to be what was acceptable to the property owner. And so if the property owner, if you could never give them an amount that was just to them, then the government didn't get the property. But today we have the left embracing. I'm sure you've heard the song, right? John Lennon's song, Imagine, especially if you're older like I am. That's the Marxist fantasy they're embracing, right? A world without countries, religion, or possessions, while ignoring that such systems inevitably lead to poverty and oppression. A brotherhood of man, right? The economic consequences of this approach are predictable and devastating. Confiscating capital kills innovation, by removing incentives. I debated a young communist years ago. It was a nephew of a friend of mine who owns a restaurant in Southern California. And I simply asked the kid, hey, if private property is confiscated and the people through government own all means of production, then who innovates? Who invests? Who takes risks? Who works late and takes chances to build companies? Who will grow businesses and develop new ideas if the government can simply swoop in and take half or more of what they create? Now, the kid came up with this, yeah, but fair, blah, blah, blah. But the answer is no one. Without property rights, economic dynamism dies, and everyone becomes equally miserable. This assault on property rights isn't limited to federal proposals. In New York City, Mayor Mamdani's block-by-block housing plan aims to transfer building ownership from private hands to government proxies, ultimately creating a city of nothing but public housing. This is yet another socialist attack on property rights disguised as affordable housing policy. The Democratic Party has completed its transformation into a faction of the Democratic Socialists of America. And remember when Hillary was running and Bernie Sanders was too radical for them? Now he's the mainstream. Now the frog in the pot approach of gradual socialism is being abandoned in favor of open calls for dismantling constitutional structures. They no longer hide their intentions to eliminate the Electoral College, separation of powers, or any other constitutional barrier to their absolute power. And the model? Well, that's California. California, a state spiraling into dysfunction with unaffordable living costs, but where Democrats hold a supermajority, Republicans are completely irrelevant. This is what they want nationwide. One-party rule where constitutional restraints are meaningless and opposition is powerless. The 2026 primary season. Where's that noise coming from?
Outside.
Okay, I'm like, I hear this noise. I'm trying to broadcast. Okay.
Close the door at the door.
Yeah, please. Yeah, we got this weird noise, and you guys might not hear it. I sure do. But anyway, the 2026 primary season has already produced outright wins or runoff advancements for more than a dozen, thank you, Democratic Socialists of America backed candidates. They've successfully convinced younger voters and aging hippies to view collectivist socialism through rose-colored glasses. Of course, the hippies were already there. They were already ignoring history's brutal lessons. I know this because when I was a kid in the 70s, hippies were my teachers. They're the ones that ripped my pencil out of my left hand and put it in my right hand because everybody had to be the same. And so I'm left-handed in everything that I've learned naturally, but I write and throw right-handed because that's what I got taught by the hippies. But you have to, but see, back then the revolution was kind of creeping. Back then it was creeping incrementalism, the frog in the pot. Now it's sprinting. And tyrants in history understood this strategy. The communists and Adolf Hitler used the same strategy of getting to the younger generation. Adolf Hitler, speaking to the older generation in 1933, said this: "Your child belongs to us already. What are you? You will pass on. Your descendants, however, now stand in the new camp. In a short time, they will know nothing else but this new community." This is precisely how the radical left operates, through indoctrination in schools and universities until revolution seems natural to the young. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this revolution is how it erodes moral standards. The case of Graham Plattner in Maine exemplifies this dangerous trend. Despite allegations of domestic violence, admitted sexting shortly after marriage, mocking Purple Heart recipients, calling soldiers fat, lazy trash, slandering rural Americans as racist and stupid, and making crude comments about blacks and porta-johns, and we'll go a little bit further than that, but I won't because it's a family show. Democratic voters continue to support him. Why? Because he openly embraces communism. It represents their best chance to advance the revolution. His character doesn't matter because the ends justify the means. Plattner's personal misdeeds are alarming, but his politics are worse. He openly embraces the ideology that slaughtered 100 million people in the 20th century while oppressing and impoverishing billions more. He sported a tattoo identified as being those worn by Hitler's SS at death camps, celebrating fascism, another form of destructive socialism. Claimed he didn't know what it meant. I don't have a tattoo, but I've been in tattoo parlors. You know how when you go into the book, and you're looking for tattoos, you know what they do? They group them together. So if you want a dragon, it's in the dragons section. If you want a butterfly, it's going to be in the cutesy butterfly section. If you want a military tattoo, it's going to be in the military section. And so if you're going to want a Nazi tattoo, it's going to be in the Nazi section. When he looked at that tattoo, it no doubt was right next to SS and swastikas, iron crosses, and things like that. Iron eagles. He knew it was a Nazi tattoo. He's lying. He celebrates fascism. He celebrates socialism. He's a self-admitted communist. And while Democrats have spent decades leveling false charges of Nazism against Republicans that refuse to recognize actual Nazism in their midst, and this moral blindness demonstrates how completely the Democratic Party has been captured by extremists. They become the party of socialist Islamists, radicals who seek to murder the U.S. Constitution and silence opposition. They can't win in the arena of ideas, so they manufacture moral authority on a platform of historically failed concepts that inevitably build resentment, government dependency, economic collapse, and mass death. The communist revolution requires an enemy to justify its existence, right? Orwell, right? With Orwell, there always had to be the enemy. The enemy is always attacking. The war is ongoing. And since ordinary Americans, particularly conservatives, constitutionalists, Trump supporters, don't fit the oppressive narrative, the left manufactures its enemies through deception and provocation. Anyone who has ever attended a Trump rally or a Tea Party event or a Republican meeting knows that these are some of the nicest, most considerate people you'll ever meet. They simply won't do for revolutionaries who need vile opponents. So the Southern Poverty Law Center exemplified the strategy on what to do. While presenting itself as a monitor of hate groups, it has funneled millions to actual white supremacist organizations, including the Ku Klux Klan, the American Nazi Party, Aryan Nation, Unite the Right, which is a constructed group by the Democrats. Democrats have funded the SPLC, effectively donating directly to the KKK and Nazi Party, all while citing these very groups as evidence of widespread right-wing hate. This manufactured outrage extends to how events are characterized. Riots become peaceful protests, while peaceful protests by conservatives are labeled insurrection. They cheer Iran's Islamic terrorists who have murdered hundreds of Americans because Islam and the Democrats share the same enemies: Christians, Israel, conservatives, constitutionalists, and Donald Trump. The slander campaign targets anyone who refuses to toe the Democratic line. Charlie Kirk at Turning Point USA was designated a hate group. So were Moms for Liberty, the Tea Party, and even a group called the Constitution Club that a friend of mine ran. Because defending that hate-filled document called the U.S. Constitution made you an extremist in their eyes. The revolution's ultimate goal is dismantling constitutional order. When Democrats like President Obama denounce gerrymandering, they don't mean ending the practice. They mean ending what they consider to be Republican gerrymandering while preserving their own. And the so-called Republican gerrymandering wasn't gerrymandering. It was undoing Democratic gerrymandering to get it back to some type of reasonable system. Virginia's congressional redistricting plan would have replaced the Democrats' 6-5 advantage with a 10-1 super majority in a nearly evenly split state. Historical context matters here. No political party in U.S. history has abused congressional redistricting more than the Democratic Party, which controlled the House for all but 4 years from 1931 until the mid-1990s through state-level gerrymandering machines. They rewrite history to conceal this reality while projecting their sins onto Republicans. And when Democrats talk about standing up for democracy, they mean destroying the Republican mechanisms that constrain our system. They are talking about destroying the republic. The founders established a republic with limited democratic processes precisely because they understood democracy's tendency toward tyranny. And the Senate was designed to offset the House's democratic impulses and ensure minority voices, particularly in rural areas, could check urban dominance. The communist revolution in America advances through multiple vectors simultaneously: educational indoctrination, economic confiscation, political transformation, moral degradation, manufactured enemies, and constitutional dismantling. Each component reinforces the others in a coordinated assault on American exceptionalism. And today's socialists live in comfort built by the very system they claim to detest. Most have never experienced the hard work of building through discovery, innovation, and growth. They are activists, community organizers, extremists who only know what they've been taught, that America is unfair, they are oppressed, and the only solution is communist revolution, either through political processes or street violence. The revolution's motto is by any means necessary. They will cheat, lie, manipulate to achieve their goals. And as we've seen with Graham Plattner, character no longer matters. Only ideological purity and revolutionary potential. The ends justify all means. Protecting property rights remains essential to economic growth. Confiscating capital is the fastest way to kill an economy. The private sector inspires creativity and innovation. Without it, systems die because no innovators remain to reverse the downward spiral and envision better horizons. The best defense, perhaps the only one, is an educated electorate that understands history and constitutional principles. The leftist progressive communists know this. This is why they've infiltrated and gained near complete control of education systems while seeking to eliminate competition from homeschooling and private schools. America stands at a precipice. The communist revolution is no longer coming, it is here. It operates openly in our political discourse, our classrooms, our culture. It demands we surrender our property, our principles, and our constitutional heritage in exchange for failed promises of equality and justice. The question is whether enough Americans recognize the threat in time to preserve what the founders bequeathed us, a constitutional republic that has produced more prosperity and freedom than any system in human history. Mel says in the chat room, once again, if you're watching live, I encourage you to chat, because not only because I do pay attention to the chat, but also because, and that's for both Rumble and YouTube, but also because when there's a lot of chatting going on, it helps with exposure of this video, of it being out there. The more people attend, the more people who click that little thumbs up, the more people who subscribe, the more people who acknowledge, the more people who comment, gives us a much more visibility when it comes to the systems and the algorithms and all that jazz. So Mel says the left has gone from gradual increasing the heat on the frog to just using a flamethrower the whole time. Absolutely. Poor little frog, as my wife would say, right?
Yeah.
And like I said, there's many steps along the way, many steps that have gotten us here. And it's an amazing thing because, you know, I watch this and I realize, and here's what's funny, now that I'm kind of getting ahead of myself a little bit, is it drives me nuts that the average person doesn't understand history, doesn't understand the Constitution. They're not properly engaged, they're not properly informed. But what's even worse is when our supposed allies can't even get it right. I'll give you an example, and understand, what I'm getting ready to do here is not an attack. I like Dagan McDowell of Fox News. She's the country girl with the accent. And I've seen her, mostly on shows like Gutfeld, and Gutfeld is interesting because if there's any show on, and don't get me wrong, I love Greg Gutfeld. I think he's brilliant politically. Not always fond of his jokes, but Greg himself fairly intelligent when it comes to political discussion, political debate. But guests on Gutfeld, and sometimes Greg himself, their historical and constitutional ignorance sometimes drives me nuts. It disqualifies them from speaking about history and the Constitution in the manner that they do. I mean, if you're going to make a statement and frame it as fact, you better know what you're talking about. So what I'm referring to is Dagan McDowell was on Gutfeld's Friday, June 5th show this year. And the discussion centered around Scott Bessent, who serves as the United States Secretary of Treasury. And during a hearing with the House Ways and Means Committee, one of the leftist Democratic Congress critters complained that Trump's military operations in Iran are illegal because Iran didn't attack us, which is ridiculous. That's not it. But quick as a whip, Bessent challenged the Democrat, asking if his questioner knew who Woodrow Wilson was. They said they didn't know, and he explained that Wilson was president during Democrat during World War I against Germany, and Germany never attacked us. Now, technically, Germany did attack us with unrestricted submarine warfare, which resulted in the sinking of American merchant ships. But I know what Bessent was trying to get across. Germany never attacked the homeland directly with bombs, troops, and or military equipment like planes, tanks, and mortar fire in a manner along the lines that as the Japanese did during their attack on Pearl Harbor. But that's not the topic here. So I'll get back on the right path here. We'll shoot the rabbit, get on the main trail. When asked about Bessent's comment, McDowell began to fume about Woodrow Wilson, and should. Woodrow Wilson is one of the worst presidents in the history of this country. He's definitely on my mountain. So if there was a Mount Rushmore of the worst, he's on it. Put it that way. I don't think he's the worst, but he's among the worst. And so she's fuming about him. You can see the disgust in her face. And I'm right there. And like I said, I'm right there with her. But then she says, and this is where I started shaking my head, Woodrow Wilson signed the income tax into law. He was the worst president. Now, and some of you may say, well, yeah, he signed the income tax into law. Now, hear me out. There's a lot more context of the situation than most people realize. McDowell was likely referring to the emergence of the 16th Amendment, and her answer was basically an oversimplification of the matter and was technically incorrect. The 16th Amendment established the federal income tax. That changed taxation from indirect taxation to direct taxation of the American people. And it was ratified in 1913 during Woodrow Wilson's presidency. But presidents have no formal role in the constitutional amendment process. They don't sign amendments nor their proposals. The amendment process requires a proposal by Congress without the president being involved whatsoever, with a 2/3 majority of both houses, or a proposal by the states with a 2/3 majority by the states in convention, and then ratification of 3/4 of the states. Governors and presidents, the executives, are not involved whatsoever. It is completely a legislative process, or in the case of ratification, it can also be by convention of the people at a state in order to approve it rather than the state legislature. But so Woodrow Wilson did indeed sign a law related to income taxation, the Revenue Act of 1913. The act reimposed the federal income tax after the 16th Amendment removed the constitutional barriers that had prevented such a tax. But he didn't technically sign the income tax into law because he didn't sign the 16th Amendment itself. He signed legislation that implemented the federal income tax under the authority granted by that amendment. But the income tax becoming law of the land That was through the constitutional amendment. He had no signature in that. And I'm willing to bet McDowell is not such a historian that she knew the details about the Revenue Act of 1913. She was probably referring to the 16th Amendment. So her wording made it sound, or at least her wording made it sound that way. Now, and if I'm wrong, forgive me. But it makes me mad because by saying something like Wilson was the president, was the guy who signed income tax into law, rather than Wilson was president when the income tax became the law of the land. And she could have maybe even said he signed the first piece of legislation following the ratification of the 16th Amendment. She was factually wrong. This is where I get frustrated, because the facts are the facts, and yet we got a bunch of people who can't even understand the facts. I'll give you an example of that too. And this is going on right now, is Karmelo Anthony, the black kid who stabbed the white track guy, football player / track guy, and high schooler Austin Metcalf. And this Karmelo Anthony went inside the tent of the opposing school, got in the face of Austin Metcalf, who told him, "Hey man, I don't want to fight. Get out of here." Other people are saying, get out of the tent." And then Karmelo Anthony, who has no history of being violent, by the way, but for whatever reason, he had a knife on him and used that knife to stab Austin Metcalf to death. Now, 19-year-old Karmelo Anthony just got what I believe too short of a sentence, but he got 35 years and he'd be eligible for parole in like 17 and a half years for murdering Metcalf. And it's a straight up murder case. Someone came in, they killed somebody, and they showed some type of hatred for the persons, maybe some preconception of it. It was malicious. That's murder. He's lucky he didn't get life. The max sentence for what he did was 99 years. My wife thinks it should have been death. But nonetheless, this is the facts of the case. It has nothing to do with the black-white, but the killer was black. The guy who got killed was white. And so the protesters outside decided to make it racist. There's nothing racist about it. Oh, well, poor Karmelo Anthony was acting in self-defense. Metcalf had no weapon. Metcalf had been pushed, argued with, screamed at, and finally, before he got stabbed, decided to push Anthony back, which then triggered the stabbing. But Karmelo Anthony was not in danger, his life was not in danger at any time. Metcalf had no weapon. The person who produced a weapon was Anthony. He's the one that had the weapon. He's the one that pulled it out. He's the one that killed somebody for whatever reason. He's guilty. His 35-year sentence was announced. Then there was a crowd outside that had gathered. The news was provided, and then the crowd became enraged, claiming that it was self-defense. But what if Metcalf had not been white? What if it was black on black violence? Or better yet, what if it was Karmelo Anthony was a white man and the one that got killed was black? If it was black on black crime, we wouldn't have heard a thing about it. If it was white on black crime, we would have had a George Floyd situation. But they're trying to make this black killer on a white guy a George Floyd type. They're freaking out. They're screaming and yelling. Metcalf's family, as supporters, are all screaming with expletives outside the court. He was defending himself. And this is a legalized lynching. And then one of them screams, well, tell those white folks, why is a black boy in front of an all-white jury? It wasn't an all-white jury. There's Hispanics, Asians on that jury. And once again, it had nothing to do with color. Who cares who the jurors were? And then those other ones said something about, well, white people don't understand the threat that blacks live under, being afraid. Afraid of what? I'm not seeing in the news a bunch of roving gangs of white people going around killing black people. And in fact, most crimes, especially violent crime against blacks, is, well, by blacks. And I really don't care about the color. Once again, this is not about race. They're making it about race. Race has become the first thing they grab at because they can't win in the arena ideas. They're wrong. And when people are wrong, they start reaching for stuff. And race is the first thing they look for. A young man killed another young man. The young man who did the killing was 19, so he was legally an adult. He killed a 17-year-old, I believe, Metcalf was. He killed a minor. And he did it maliciously with a deadly weapon. And the person killed did not have a deadly weapon. The confrontation was verbal until the very end, where there was one push. And somehow, because of race, Karmelo Anthony was acting in self-defense. I don't think so. But that's what they, and it's funny because when I say they, I'm talking about the left, I'm talking about progressives. This is what they do. They take the truth and they twist it a little bit. They take the truth, just enough truth to fill in the lie. But get back to the political end of it. The main thing is they got to protect they also have to protect their narrative. That's the reason why in California, after Riverside County Sheriff Chad Bianco had seized a whole bunch of election records from last November because a watchdog group indicated that there were more votes tallied than voters. So they were looking into it. They're investigating to make sure there was no fraud, voter fraud. Well, see, you got to remember, when it comes to the Democratic Party, if you say voter fraud, if you talk about elections, you talk about elections not being fair, or at least in blue areas, and when blue and regarding Democrat wins, why, you're committing insurrection. You're trying to overturn an election. You're an election denier, is a term they like to use. But so in California, where they have a supermajority of Democrats and Gavin Newsom is governor, what did they do after Chad Bianco looked into those records? They passed a law. They passed a law that, quote, threatens jail for spreading election lies with the goal of illegally interfering with counting ballots. So they passed SB 73. SB 73 in California. This is before the LA mayoral election. So if anybody wants to look into it, because how weird was it that Spencer Pratt was in second place until right there at the last second, and suddenly with all those mail-in ballots, Rahman just squeaked above him to take that number 2 spot. But if you dare say anything, if you dare access, disrupt, modify, seize voter rolls, look at voter lists, and we're talking law enforcement, we're talking anybody who holds office, including federal agents, without a court order, 3 years in jail and a fine. In other words, if you try to investigate fraud, you will be jailed for it. They are effectively making laws to make it harder for there to be any election integrity. And that's what communists do, getting back to the original topic here. They put in laws blocking anybody that can stop them, silencing the opposition. In this case, blocking investigators from looking into fraud in California. It's corrupt, and it's what tyrants do. They call Trump a king. No kings, no kings. But then they do this. You have, and you've got what, weeks of counting ballots in California? Every other state, they knew before midnight. When I was a kid, every election was known by midnight. And we didn't even have technology because they weren't playing games. You know, my dad used to tell me when I was a kid that if you don't want to get yourself into trouble, don't put yourself in that situation. I remember telling my son something similar. He had gone to some party, and I warned him beforehand, you know, it's in a bad area. It's, you know, bad people be there. And he wound up getting beat up. You don't, if someone is putting themselves in certain situations because they're opening them, they are going to open themselves up to it. And that's what the Democrats are doing. They want to create a situation so they can open up fraud. Oh, well, we're not committing fraud. Then why are you passing all these laws that will enable it? I mean, because if there is potential for fraud, then, and you want fair elections, then why not close the loopholes that scream from the rooftops fraud? And then why are you passing laws saying there's no proof of fraud, and if you think there is, we'll arrest you for it? Audit your voter rolls, prove that everything's on the up and up. If it's a fair, free election, you got nothing to hide. Open up the records. Let's see it. But because, see, they want the fraud. They commit the fraud. So, well, Doug, there's no evidence of that. Well, no, because they're controlling everything. But don't worry, Gavin Newsom has decided that he's also going to defend California's election process, not by looking into it, not by opening up the records, but by pumping more money into it. That'll fix the problem. This is a state that can't balance its budget, is in extreme debt, is failing. Since there's questions about the election, we're not going to open up our records. We're not going to let outside agencies look at them. But tell you what, we're going to put dollars into it. We're going to propose an election count accelerator fund, said Governor Newsom. Money. Because that's the way to fix problems, according to the Democrats. Just throw some money at it. That's what they do. I had a friend of mine who ran for office, and he originally was a Democrat. What turned him into a Republican? He's in this meeting, and the Democrats are talking about all these issues they're running on, and homelessness, and this, and poverty, and they have their list. And the guy says, "Well, why don't we change our tactics a little bit to make sure we solve these problems?" And the room went silent. And one of them says to him, "Well, if we solve the problem, what would we run on?" And the thing is, the fakery goes for both sides. It's not just the Democrats. I was watching something, what was it, last night, this video of Representative Rob Whitman, Republican from Virginia, caught faking a phone call outside the U.S. Capitol to avoid answering reporter questions. And they showed the video. He's sitting there and he's talking like he's talking to somebody. You can see the screen was not a phone call. He's acting like he's making a deal or something with his fake phone call. It was a lefty person asking the questions. They were asking him a dumb question. They're asking, Speaker Mike Johnson has potential plans to cut Social Security. Can you tell me anything about that? Rather than answer it, the guy makes a fake phone call so he doesn't have to answer it. It's an easy answer. Hey, buddy, right now we're in the middle of discussions on, so I can't give you too much, but I will tell you this. We're not planning on cutting Social Security. in the sense of benefits. We're planning on cutting out the waste and the fraud. In a conversation, off you go. Easy peasy. So why play the game of pulling the phone out of your pocket and faking a phone call so you don't have to answer it? Is he stupid? Is he on the other side, or are they doing something underhanded? Ron Johnson, who I respect, Republican from Wisconsin, pulled a similar stunt on live television regarding questions regarding alternate slates of electors way back, I think in the previous couple elections ago, 2020 election. Hey, man, you're a representative. You can say one of two things. Either I can't comment on that right now, thank you for asking, or give an answer that it gives you an opportunity to kind of put them in their place. Hey, your answer is based on the wrong premise. Speaker Mike Johnson does not have plans to cut Social Security. We have plans to cut fraud and waste in Social Security. In a conversation, I don't get the faked phone call, but it doesn't help when we're trying to say, well, there's a handful of politicians that aren't crooks, and then they act like crooks too. Now, Short Bus in the chat says, well, victimized mentality and lack of responsibility. I think people are learning their morals from politicians. No, the politicians learn it from us. Ed. Breitbart used to say that politics runs downstream from the culture. We're not going to get our political house in order till we get our moral house in order. Because politics follows us. And when I say us, I don't mean you and me. I mean the public in general. And when you've got a bunch of people whose morals are about as crooked as a flight path of a drug runner, then you're going to get that type of leadership. So I'll end it with, let me find it real quick so I say it verbatim, because sometimes I mess up a word or two. So it's one of my favorite quotes. Benjamin Franklin. This is the end of the lesson. This is the thing. If you take anything home with you after this show, this is the quote I want you to remember. Benjamin Franklin, only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. As nations become corrupt and vicious, they have more need of masters. When we stop being a virtuous people, they crack down. That's what they do. Thanks for spending the time with me. United we stand, combined we kick butt. God bless America, my friends. God bless you. It's been a pleasure spending this hour with you. Visit me at douglasvgibbs.com, or go to, and also, if you want to see the list of my books, buy a book. Buy a few of them. I have written 11 of them so far. I've got another one in the wings. Check out what's coming. Check out what I've already published. Purchase one. Go to navigation2liberty.com. Navigation, the number 2, liberty.com. douglasvgibbs.com right there. And of course, follow, subscribe, whatever it is on this video channel, do it and share the links with your friends. Let's grow the show. Let's make this show bigger than it was on AM FM radio before I decide to migrate to Rumble and YouTube. God bless. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye now.